Hey everyone, this is S.J. Thomason with Christian-Apologist.com, and I am super excited to report I have writer John Buck with me. And writer John Buck has written something, that's really interesting. And I am, to be honest, I'm shocked that writer John Buck is as young as he is. You're less than half my age, and you have written this amazing teleplay that I think is incredibly insightful, and it has all of the types of topics that I think are interesting, including things like morality and objective morality and the source of our objective morality. And you even have people in there who play different roles. And there are some people who play the atheist role. And I think that the way it opened up it just grabbed my attention. The way that teleplay opened up, I thought, oh my gosh, he says we shouldn't have any kids. What was this guy?
Yeah.
Planet. And so it opened up in this amazing way, and I thought, wow, this is just, that had my attention. You had me at hello, if you want to say. And so I read into it, and then I noticed that each person in there takes a different viewpoint on this, and it was amazing how you're able to go in and really steel man other people's perspectives, because I don't think I could do that. So when I was reading the atheist perspective, and it was making me mad, of course, because I was like, no, that's not, oh no, that is what they argue. Your arguments, it's almost like you have listening and studying their viewpoints, and you put it all onto paper. So John, can you introduce yourself and let everyone know, how did you get into this business, and how do you know all this stuff?
Sure.
I'm really amazed.
Yeah, thanks so much, Stephanie. That means a lot. So, so I wrote this script. It's called The Anti-Natalist, and I wrote it just as kind of like a basic, just kind of like a basic one-room kind of one setup thing. I was originally thinking about it as something I could film, but really it's all dialogue driven, so I think it could work just as fine as a teleplay, which is what I'm actually going to be producing it as. Or at least I'm doing a live table reading, which you're actually playing a part within on August 1st. Hopefully, fingers crossed for all that. So, okay. So the Anti-Natalist, it's a teleplay, which is just basically like a radio drama or something like that. Like it could be done as a script for like a film, or it could be done as like a play on stage or something like that. But just for my own purposes, it works just fine as a teleplay. And it's about this like professor who he's attempting to convince like 5 random people about how the human race should voluntarily go extinct. Because it is morally wrong to procreate children into a world in which they will experience suffering and death and undesired afflictions towards themselves. And yeah, it was quite the interesting endeavor to go on, to try to write out these like 6 different perspectives, and trying to make each perspective as strong as it possibly can be. And so I would have to go through, kind of get into the mindset of, say, the Anti-Natalist, which is kind of like the protagonist / antagonist of the piece itself. I guess it really depends upon the perspective of the audience, and get into kind of their way of thinking, try to understand how they go about looking at things, and then after write out all their pieces, try to come at it from like almost responding to what I've already written, but with a different perspective of, say, I have a rational egoist on there who's like also an atheist, but holds that people do have free will and are able to make rational choices about what is for their benefits of their health, and that is the basis for morality. That's another perspective that I have on there. And so responding to the anti-natalist arguments, but from this other perspective and just kind of doing that with each of the different perspectives. So I have the anti-natalist, who is like a nihilist atheist. Well, it's not necessarily nihilist, because he believes that people's actions are important, and that the actions that we do that causes sufferings are actions that we should avoid doing at all costs. And so his perspective, then I have the Christian perspective as best as I can get it, because these are topics that are kind of foreign to a lot of these different worldviews. And I think that was kind of what really drew me to this, is because there's a lot of these types of conversations that have been going on before, like the problem of evil, divine hiddenness, morality, all of these different conversations occur. But the topic of antinatalism was kind of a new one to me, that I wanted to kind of get an idea of what are each of the different perspectives on this specific topic. And so that's why I wrote the script, really.
Yeah, I liked it. And the part that you have me playing, so I'm Ellen, the Catholic, and my first scene, I'm staring at a crucifix. So I'm gonna have to go get some of my Catholic paraphernalia from my past life and bring it up here. So because and I can completely relate to her. So I thought that was great.
Oh.
You picked a good one for me. I wouldn't have been able to relate so well to the other ones. But actually, that makes me wonder, are there any particular people that you modeled off of? Where did you find these perspectives? For example, were you on Twitter and you saw people arguing, or were these in debates that you watched and you thought, okay, I could probably take bits and pieces of that person's argument and weave it into this person here? So did you do that?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of so each character I write is not so much a basis from one individual person, but kind of an amalgamation of other people that have similar worldviews, and then kind of put them together, because surprisingly enough, they kind of cohere. So like the anti-natalist, Samuel Carter, he's kind of an amalgamation out of, the particular, there's an actual anti-natalist philosopher that writes work in philosophy of, his name is David Benatar. And so I took from him, also from Sam Harris, because he has a similar perspective on morality and kind of the weighing of harms against goods, which is like kind of typical utilitarianism. Also, Peter Singer. Peter Singer is a high inspiration for Samuel Carter's character as well. And then for the others, I kind of just take from both people I interact with in real life, because there's always kind of the more spiritual but not religious persons. So one of my characters, Lindsay, she's kind of like that kind of the all is one kind of Buddhist meditation and spiritual practices. And you can kind of get these not stereotypes, but at least like abstracted characters out from the people that you interact with, and kind of align them to some of the different characters that I have in the script. And so hopefully, like, for the people that are will listen and watch it, they'll get at least some character, even if you're atheist, Buddhist, or agnostic, or any of these types. There'll be one character that you can kind of draw on and feel like their arguments against, say, the anti-natalists are supportive of kind of your own positions in some ways, at least.
Oh, that's interesting. And yeah, that's I always think it's funny, because when I actually wrote a couple of fiction books they're not very good, but I wrote them in 2014 and 2013. And I thought it was kind of funny when I would threaten my family members that, I was going to make a character out of them. Yeah, the antagonist in my story is you. So I think it could be funny if you're a good writer and you actually are going to go and your writing is phenomenal. When you're a good writer and you're able to articulate yourself and you're able to really look at people's perspectives and understand them so well, I think it's kind of funny when people read that, if they could relate to that, they say, hey, wait a second, that sounds like something I'd say. It's going to be funny if Peter Singer or Sam Harris happened to listen to your thing and think, that sounds like me in the moral landscape, or that sounds like me in my debate with William Lane. I think Peter Singer, if I'm not mistaken, I'm trying to remember who he debated, but I think he's debated John Lennox and I think William Lane Craig, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, so there's a lot of those material on Peter Singer.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of those debates that I both drew from to help me kind of bolster the arguments on all the different sides, but also just drew from, like, even prior to me writing this. So I actually started writing this a year ago or so. Yeah, because it was around 4th of July. And even before that, though, I was still like watching all these types of like, isn't there a God, and all these debates on morality that are out there. And so a lot of that is kind of drew for inspiration for the characters and also the story in my script. So.
So you yourself, and just so the audience knows it, so you're a Christian, correct?
Right. I was raised in a kind of non-denominational, almost separate from Protestantism exactly. It was kind of like this, not exactly Jehovah's Witnesses, but it's one of those same types. It's part of the Hebrew roots movements. So that's my history. And later in my life, I've been trying to get a better understanding of Christianity in general, and getting a much better understanding of all these kind of topics that are brought up even inside the script there. And so, yes, I would I would say I'm still in a position of trying to find myself, like what I do think to be true, and get a good understanding of that. And that's also partially like why I wrote the script, is to hopefully get more clarity in a lot of these issues, and maybe even get help from fellow Christians in getting some perspectives on these types of things, because I don't pull any punches as best as I can for these actual issues, and I'm trying to really take them as seriously as they deserve to be.
Yeah, and I think the character that you have me playing, I just wrote a blog that reminds me kind of that. The blog talks about the difference between intrinsic religiosity and extrinsic religiosity. And the idea, if you're high in intrinsic religiosity, you have a very strong relationship with God, and you've got a very tight-knit relationship. And it's like it could almost be as if when God tests you, a lot of times it could even build your relationship with God. It's that kind of religiosity that's real strong. And then there's the idea of extrinsic. And I think Ellen, if I had to guess, I think Ellen might be more of the extrinsic. She gets a little bit out of the church services, and she gets something out of the community, and probably feels good about going to church and interacting with other people on Sundays, kind of thing. But when the going gets tough, she might walk away. And I think a lot of people, probably more people, are like that, sadly, in this day. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that how it is currently is like people have their kind of faiths as just part of their identity, just because that's like what they're raised in, and like this is where they go to for belonging and community, and just because I don't know that's what their family is like. And so there's more. I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing at all, because like, I mean, people, we are kind of collective creatures, and so we require some sort of community to interact with and gain meaning from. But if that's our like primary source of meaning, then it doesn't have as strong of a foundation as the more intrinsically religious. It's funny because I helped Craig Reed with his channel, and we interviewed Michael Jones from Inspiring Philosophy, and
he
talked a bit about intrinsic and extrinsic religiosity, and it's such a fascinating topic that does not ever really get discussed in these types of circles that I find. Like I first found out about it from him, and I think his debate with Matt Dillahunty.
Yes, I loved his debate with Matt Dillahunty.
Right.
And he does. Actually, I listened to almost all of that. I forget why I had to leave, but somehow I had to leave towards the end of your show with Craig. But I listened to a lot of it. And Mike is great. How did you get him on on Craig's channel? Because I thought he'd be one of those big fish where you can't get him on a smaller, relatively smaller channel.
No, I thought for sure that as well. I don't know. I messaged him on Facebook, and it took a bit of time for him to respond, but it seems like he kind of is perfectly up for doing these kind of small type interviews. Like he goes on quite a few other little channels as well. So it's not just we threatened him with blackmail or something.
No, you got me. Now I'm encouraged, because I think I might go to try to get a hold of him too.
Yeah, you should. Yeah, he's a great conversationalist, and he has a lot of like really interesting ideas that are kind of foreign to, I think, a lot of the kind of standard Christians that are out there that don't have a good understanding for both biblical interpretation and also like how to integrate evolution with their Christianity. I think he's a big support for people that are trying to do that.
Yeah, and so would you say that what would you call yourself? You're not a young Earth creationist if you're saying what you're saying about evolution, probably.
Right. No, I don't know if I have an exact like label or anything like that, but I would say, I accept evolution, and I think it does raise some problems with the Christian worldview in certain ways that I'm still trying to resolve, for sure. Like, at least if we were to take evolution seriously and to take everything that it says into account as like the entirety of a worldview, like everything is only based upon the natural selection, then yes, it does raise some serious objections to the understanding of Christianity. So wherever we can figure, I think that has been kind of a fault for a lot of the Christian community in the early 2000s, is not being able to have answers to these types of questions. And so instead of dealing with the material, just kind of objecting to it and dismissing it because it is not based within a scriptural worldview. And so, I mean, I can understand that the rejection of science in order to retain your system of identity and morality and all of that. But I think there's a greater responsibility on us to get a better understanding of that, so that we can help people not have to make that type of a decision of rejecting one and accepting the other.
I agree with you. You know, and when I look at Genesis, I don't see it as in contrast to evolution, as strange as that might sound. I figure God did say animals came prior to humans. So to me, it seems to make sense that it's possible that, and I don't see the, I also don't necessarily endorse the young earth creationists, although I appreciate people if they want to be young earth creationists. I think that they obviously show their faith in God and in God's word, and I think that that's very admirable. And if God did want to make the earth make it look older, and if he wanted to make it in 6 days, he's obviously perfectly capable of doing that. Uh-huh. So I mean, if I died and then God got in front of me and said, "I can't believe you didn't believe the young earth," I'd say, "Well, I believe you. If you wanted to do that in 6 days, I'm good with that. You know, we're good." But as far as Michael's interpretation of Genesis, one thing I saw with him that I hadn't heard of before, and I need to dig into it because I really don't understand it, the way he was expressing it with his debate with G-Man. Did you happen to catch that?
I caught like the middle part of it. I wanted to get to where it was good, and it ended up being pretty good with the part that I got into it. But yeah, it seems like it was kind of stalled out for quite a bit there with G-Man.
Yeah, so G-Man takes the perspective, just so if people didn't see this, and actually G-Man subscribed to my channel today, so I'm really excited.
Hi, G-Man.
So
keep up the good work, G-Man.
So if he watches this, he'll hear his name, he'll probably get a little warm, fuzzy feeling. But he has a view that, and I'll just say this for the audience, because I do think it's an interesting thing to think about. In the Old Testament, in Genesis, they talk about people living a really long time. It says, oh, he lived 900 years, or oh, he lived 950 years. And so it seems to, and G-Man took that perspective that God sort of changed around the way humans are built and our rate of decay and that kind of thing. And so G-Man takes that more of a literal thing, that the 900 years would mean 900 years today, or even a little less perhaps, because they did count in 360-day years back then. But G-Man takes that perspective, and then Michael takes the perspective that, I think, if I'm not mistaken, he takes it as if it's almost like 900 would maybe be 90 years, or maybe it was a divisor of 60. I forget exactly what he does, but
yeah. So Michael, he holds that the ages that are given to the patriarchs in Scripture are more to do with the symbolic meaning of the numbers themselves. So say I don't know, you take one of the ages and it's like divisible by 7 being the number for perfection. And so that's kind of like an understanding, oh, this is 12 times 10 times 7 or something like that. And then there's this it's almost like how when you would name your child, or especially in the Bible, they would name their child based upon like what they were feeling about the time, like naming their like Mara changing, or Naomi changing her name to Mara because of the bitterness that she had received. So I think it's similar to that instead of assigning an age to one of your patriarchs in history to do with their actual age of how long they lived, it was more to do with what is the meaning of that person's life and how can we describe that meaning through the age that we give to them.
Interesting.
I think so. I have to get a better understanding, because I think he brings an interesting case for it, and I think it's from John Walton and his work. So if people are interested in that, I think they can refer to that to get a better understanding of that position. But
okay.
like I said, yeah, I'm not too familiar with it.
Yeah, I'm not, and again, just like the thing I pointed with the young Earth, if I get to stand in front of God one day and say, I wasn't sure, was it a symbol or was it?
Right.
I don't see that as being a make or break deal as far
Right.
as far as Jesus, because I feel like Christianity is about Jesus, and this other stuff is sort of tangential. It's interesting. It's tangential though.
Right.
But I think that is interesting, and it reminds me sort of the genealogies, because some people have pointed out that the genealogies in Matthew and Luke are a little bit different, and one goes back to the time of Adam and the other one goes back to the time of Abraham, but they're a little bit different, but they're very symbolic. Like one of them has groups of 14, and I forget which one, but somehow the number 14 meant something, and they only talked about the people who they considered important in this long range of people. So they might not mention everyone who's a descendant of Abraham, but they mention maybe one person and then maybe another person down the road and another person, the people who were important and maybe mentioned in the Bible. So I think that that's one way of looking at those kind of things and trying to give ourselves a little longer estimate of the age of the earth, if you want to say that. So, but that's just kind of out there. So that's an interest. So you've been on with Craig's channel, and Craig, let's throw Craig a bone. So it's called Craig Reed Holy on Twitter.
Right.
And you're writer John Buck on Twitter, but you've been on his channel for a while. So have you been involved in any other interesting interviews on that channel?
So yeah, Craig Reed is such an interesting fellow. His channel was primarily focused on interviewing atheists and getting a better understanding of like what led them to become atheists. And I think it's like one of the most interesting channels out there, because when you get these dialogues going on between Christians and atheists, it's always discussing like where are our differences and where are you wrong, where am I right, what are the things that we disagree on. But with Craig, there's like hardly any of that, as best as he can manage it. But it's just like trying to get an understanding of like what happened in their walk and like what led them to choose to become who they are now. And I think it's really it's a very insightful look at the journeys that people are going on, and especially for some of the people like raised within kind of harmful religions or bad understandings of scripture, things like that I can see with a good understanding why they may have decided to leave the faith. Then I think for a lot of their situations, it makes sense in a lot of ways for why they did so. And so and also Craig is like wanting to not be on such contentious terms with everyone. That's another thing. Like I'm sure firsthand from a lot of experience on Twitter that
I know what it's like to be in contentious terms with people. He's a very wise man by doing that.
Yes, he is, for sure. And so I want to help him out wherever I can. He's kind of like low tech, and so I do my best to try to help him out. And like I need to do more for getting better interview guests for him. That's always like things that I need to work on my plate for him, just to help him out with that.
Well, didn't you recently have Paulogia on?
Yes, we had Paulogia. We had Seth Andrews, actually, kind of the
You
big
had
time.
Seth Andrews on there? Did I?
Right.
I think I forgot that.
Yeah.
That's a big name right there, Seth Andrews.
Yeah. That's the big name out there. It was very surprising for a lot of us. It was actually from like a mutual follower of Craig Reed and Seth Andrews kind of set it up. And yeah, Seth Andrews was just a great guest. He's very talkative, very likable just to go over a lot of different topics with. Like Craig and him talked about TV shows and movies and things like that. Yeah, Craig's just a great interviewer.
No, that was because I was thinking, now Seth Andrews, I watched some footage from the Faithless Forum, and I watched footage from the American, no, it wasn't American Atheists. There was some other conference where all these atheists were, and I saw Seth Andrews, and it's funny watching these guys in action, and it's actually the other one that I think is funny. What's his name? Thomas Westbrook. Are you familiar with him? He calls himself Holy Kool-Aid. So I saw him, and I think this is really funny that they do this. So they created different sorts of conferences where people can go if they're non-believers. And so they have these conferences. And I saw this one with Holy Kool-Aid, and he got up on a stage and he's like trying to totally say, he's like, here's what you can do. If you're good at making videos, you make your videos. If you're good at writing, you start doing blogs. We got to get the word out. I'm like, what is this? He's like doing a pep talk for non-belief. Now, if they're lack of believers, it's kind of funny. He's like,
Yeah, they're just trying to get some sort of community going around there, because that's the thing. I think for a lot of people that's kind of something that they miss from the faith that they used to have, is not having somebody that they can go to and also feel like you're having a meaningful life. So like it can be meaningful to kind of debunk a lot of like flat earthers or young earth creationists or Christians like that. It provides a sense of like meaning for what you're doing to your life, especially if like you currently see that Christianity is dangerous or harmful or something like that, because from your own experience that is what it was for you. Then you can assume that, like, make that greater it's not even a logical leap, it's just kind of like an inferential calculation that it's also harmful to a lot of other people. And so if they can provide some sort of provide some content for those people that are also in similar situations for them, it could be helpful for them to I guess resolve their situations that they're in currently.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you're right. And I think it's good for people to have communities and that kind of thing. And I think I agree with Craig on the idea of it's probably good to try to develop friendships, because sometimes people might, I have to say, I understand C.S. Lewis said something about this. He talked about Christian prigs, and he said, there are some Christians out there who are very pushy and condescending and kind of bossy. I mean, I hate to say this about people in my group, but there, and I'm like that sometimes too. So I try to not be like that as much as possible. But also I see that sometimes, and I can kind of see why some people have left the faith, not because of their relationship with God necessarily, but mainly their relationship with people in the church. And they might feel, hey, that person's a hypocrite. I saw him do this, and look at him in the church acting like he's all prim and proper. And so I think that there are some reasons why people leave that have to do with us. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's probably a good deal to it as well. As like, I think people are willing to accept a lot of strange things just based upon like who the person the strange thing is kind of coming from. So if you like admire the way that, say, Matt Dillahunty speaks, or the way that he's able to articulate an argument, and that's what you kind of see as admirable from him, then you're more likely to accept kind of the certain things that he'll say just because you want to kind of become more like him. And I think that's the thing, is like, for a lot of the Christians, we've been trying to convince people through argumentation, but by using kind of bad rhetoric styles or just in kind of mean ways for some people. And I think we need to be more focused on the light that we are, to make it seem like it's actually a club worth joining, really.
No, you're right. I think you're right. And actually that brings up a good point. You think about the arguments, and a lot of times I think people go into atheism or non-belief, if they were Christians to start, or if they were in some other faith to start, there are a number of different reasons. One could be maybe because they're angry with God. Maybe something occurred and they said a prayer and God didn't answer their prayers, and maybe somebody passed away or something like that. And so I can understand when people are angry and that kind of thing. And then maybe some people might leave because they don't like what's going on in the church, like we mentioned before, or maybe they left for other reasons. Maybe they felt like they were saying prayers, nothing happened to them, but they were saying prayers and they felt like, well, it's been years and I don't feel like I've ever had this relationship. Right. And so there's people who go for these different reasons, but none of those reasons to me, I think a lot of times there might be some emotional undercurrent. And I think if you try to convince people with a rational message and there's an emotional reason why they left, I don't think that those are going to go. I think you actually have to convince them with an emotional reason to come back. And I think who does that magnificently is Ravi Zacharias. I don't know if you've heard any of his things, but he always weaves in these stories. Like I just listened to him talking about Auschwitz, and I was practically ready to cry. I was like, oh my gosh, it's so horrible. And I thought, but the way that Ravi is able to take some horrible lesson of pain and suffering and humanity, and the way that we can be totally evil, and then turn that into Christianity and bring that into the light, like show the darkness, the darkest part of our past, and how that the light can shine in and shed light on people's humanity, or the way that people were. I think that's fascinating how he does that. So
yeah, I think you're right in a lot of ways there. And like one of my favorite kind of public atheists out there right now is actually Jonathan Haidt, who is kind of a bristle to many of the anti-theists like Matt Dillahunty and Sam Harris out there, because his perspective on like religion is that it's like an evolutionary advantageous adaptation for the human species, and like people bind themselves into these tribes or religions and faiths and communities so that they can cooperate with each other and be able to survive and actually build up structures to support themselves better than they can without these types of metaphorical truths, is probably how they would put it, something like that.
I agree with, I love Jonathan Haidt. I actually joined Heterodox Academy. I don't know if you know that. I joined it, and I follow him on Twitter, and I like him, and I like his books, and I like one time I spent the whole afternoon listening to Jonathan Haidt videos, and I tweeted how I was binging on Jonathan Haidt videos, and he actually liked my tweets. I'm like, oh my gosh, he liked my tweet. But his stuff, his moral foundations theory is wonderful, and I think you kind of maybe drew from a little bit of that when you're in your Anti-Natalist. Would you say that?
One of my characters in the script is almost kind of like a follower of Jonathan Haidt, like very much an evolutionist, but not kind of like an angry atheist type of evolutionist, but actually thinking about religion as an adaptation to the species, or at least potentially an adaptation. The character's name is Thomas, and so his perspective is one that is very fun to write as well, because like I draw from people like Jonathan Haidt, David Sloan Wilson, who's another evolutionary.
Oh yeah.
And Adam Friended from Think Club.
yes, Adam Friended. You've had him on your channel too a couple times. In fact, he was in the audience on the IP thing, trying to hit up IP for.
Yeah, and actually he's going to be interviewing IP just tomorrow, actually. So. Yeah, it should be interesting to hear what they talk about. But that was a lot of it, because each of the kind of characters in the script is something that I like. Their perspective is actually like partially based upon my own perspective. Like there's a lot of like truth to the way that they're looking at things, and so the attempt that I was making with the script was trying to figure out a way in which, what are the like individual truths that each of these kind of people are starting from, and how is there a way to kind of cohere them into a singular worldview or something that can kind of make sense, because each of them are kind of like bringing forward very good arguments for their own positions, but there's always kind of something in the like maybe one of the other perspectives that is missing and isn't accounted for from their perspective. So that's one of the attempts that is trying to be made with the script, and hopefully into the future as well.
Yeah, it's a great script. Just in case if people are just tuning in now, go back to listen to the beginning. It's called Anti-Natalist, and it's a fascinating tale of a few people basically having different perspectives on objective morality, and on just morality, and on the world and suffering, and what we should do about it. And so and then you've taken even extreme perspectives with the main lead character in there. Who's going to play the lead character, by the way?
he's a younger guy. He's actually a German. But it's funny because I'm like trying to pick out people that I know that actually kind of share in some of this perspective. He's not actually an anti-natalist, but he has kind of that same utilitarian framework worldview and like secular understanding. And so I
is it Renee by chance?
No. This is a guy, a smaller person I know from back in my video gaming days.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, and he actually like really enjoys the character too. So yeah, and it'll be fun to get all these finally out there on August 1st. And so yeah, for anybody that is interested in the script, and if you like want to read it, you can hit me up on Twitter. I can send you a copy, or you can wait till the first, and we'll have a live reading of it out there, so that if you don't want to go through the process of reading it, you can listen to it and also hear from some of the different people voicing it. That, yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's going to be really interesting, and I like the fact that you've incorporated some Jonathan Haidt stuff. Just to go back to Jonathan Haidt, because one of the things that you just mentioned, and also you mentioned David Sloan Wilson, is the view. I think a lot of people take the view it's either or. It's either we take evolution or we take God, and I think they can be combined. I think that we could take the view that God worked through evolution to sort of guide humanity towards the idea of empathy and being kind to our neighbors, and in-group favoritism and that kind of thing, and out-group appreciation even. So I think God has used evolution. That's my idea. Have you ever heard of what's his name? David Berlinski. Have you heard of David Berlinski?
Yeah, I've listened to a couple of the debates that he's done, and he's like very anti-evolution, and the both from a moral kind of standpoint, thinking that the idea of evolution is kind of evil to kind of take on, but also from like a mathematical perspective and like a scientific critique of evolution. I'm sure. I don't know if I understand his arguments exactly, but yeah, I'm aware of him at least. Yeah.
He definitely, so he's got a book. So if people don't know this, so Richard Dawkins is a famous atheist who has a book called The God Delusion. And so David Berlinski has a book called The Devil's Delusion. So and I'm about to order that book because I need to read it. And I think it sounds like it's going to be pretty amusing. But he takes the view, he says evolution and the way that Darwin posited it as far as us coming from primordial soup, essentially. He said that there's he said that this idea of Darwin's is plausible. He said, but it's not necessarily completely proven in what we have from fossil history. So he tries to draw a lot of questions around evolution. And I think the idea that yes, it's plausible, but he said all the scientists jumped on that saying, well, it's plausible. Right. And so that must mean that it's absolutely 100% true. And I think that I think it's a good idea to still question some of the science. Right. And until we know for sure, we all know of small adaptations, but seeing these large adaptations that's something that, because there's that magic of time that actually, I would say time of the gaps that evolutionists tend to,
That's pretty favor. Good, yeah. There's a couple of people on Twitter that are trying to get me to look more into the actual like rational critiques against evolution rather than because like sure you kind of have your, I guess you could say, straw man, but I mean there are the legitimate like criticisms from within, like say the young Earth creationist movement for evolution, and I don't think those are taken as like very seriously at all from a lot of scientists. But of course there are the other critiques that are from fellow like mathematicians or scientists as well for evolution that I don't think also are taken seriously. I think mostly because they're just assumed to be part of the kind of more fringe young Earth creationist perspective. Like, oh, you're making an argument against evolution, you're probably somebody like a biblical literalist or something like that, when that has nothing at all to do with the argument that they're making. So yeah, I still have a lot to look into that. Like I have a couple, like 3 large books on my shelf there that needs to get through at some point.
Oh, yeah, I could see some of your books in the back. So let me ask you this. So for the Anti-Natalist, what is your plan? So you're going to release a teleplay. We're going to record it not too long from now. And to whom are you going to release this? Where is it going to go? So how are we going to get the word out about this?
Right. So it'll be released publicly on probably my, there's this channel that I'm a part of, like a channel cooperative called Bevry.me. It's BEVRY.me. And I think that at least is where the live streaming of it is going to go. I'm going to also ask like you and the other readers to record yourself from a local standpoint. That way I have clean audio in case like one of anybody's internet kind of shorts out or goes bad or that way I have some clean audio, and then from there I'll probably turn it into maybe just a nice audio file, and it'll probably also go online somewhere else, maybe on that channel, or maybe on my own particular channel. It depends. Like I'd be fine with it going anywhere. So like if you wanted to host it on like one of the readings on your channel as well because you're a participant in it, then I'd fully welcome that as well for anybody that wanted to do that.
So what because I see something like that as being possibly taken in one day by someone in Hollywood and saying, it'd be kind of interesting to have a movie based on that. Is that maybe a dream that you have? Is it, because I could see you writing screenplays and writing that kind of thing too.
Yeah, I mean that's certainly a dream I have. I don't know if it's a dream that'll ever come to fruition, and I've kind of like I could put a lot more effort into doing something like that, but I'm unsure if whether or not that would actually be financially successful. Especially like I'm writing a screenplay that I'm assuming appeals to a vast minority of people, like only people that are interested in these kind of philosophical topics and things like that. I have a sinking suspicion that not many people will be as enthusiastic of the script as like you or I are. But
yeah, but
there's at least
it's super interesting.
I know. That's the thing. Like I even find it like super interesting just reading through it myself, like just going through notes, and I'm like, man, this is such a good script. But I do know that there's a lot of people that aren't going to be that interested by it. So it might be the case that once I have like a recording of it online that I can share with people, that I can maybe turn it into a short film, or not a short film, but like a film that I could do myself, or something like that, or maybe even hire like a director, because I did directing once for a short film and I didn't particularly enjoy it. I like writing much more just because I have complete control. You don't really get that when you're directing.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and I'm not in that industry at all, so I'm not familiar with that kind of stuff. But it's fascinating. And I was just thinking, did you ever see? I know this is a very old movie, and you're not very old, so you might not know the movie. But have you ever watched the movie The Breakfast Club?
Oh yeah. I've seen The Breakfast Club a couple of times. Yeah, I've got old parents, so they sometimes make me watch old movies with them.
Yeah, because that movie, not that old. If you take The Breakfast Club and you take I see a combination of The Breakfast Club and God's Not Dead. So you've got God's Not Dead and The Breakfast Club, and you're kind of, because The Breakfast Club, the thing about that is you're looking at people who are trapped on suspension in a school. So they're all in the same room pretty much for most of the movie. They're pretty much trapped in this. I haven't seen the movie in years, but they were in this room. And so it's kind of similar to your Anti-Natalist, took place in one room. And so the movie took a deep dive into people's personalities and perspectives in The Breakfast Club. So something like that. And then you blend that in with the God's Not Dead idea. So throw in, that jerk of a professor, which basically was God's Not Dead had a jerk professor. And you're one with the professor who's the main character, who basically decided that we shouldn't have kids anymore. We should let the whole planet just die out. So,
right.
So I think it's
yeah, I can see that for sure. It definitely has that element to it, especially with Breakfast Club. Breakfast Club was really good because it kind of explored when you first go into it, you kind of have this understanding that like each character is just kind of their stereotypical, like you got the jock, the cheerleader, the goth, things like that. And then as the kind of story goes on, they start to form a friendship with each other and a bond, and you get a more nuanced understanding of each of their like histories and like their home lives and all things like that. Yeah, Breakfast Club is a great movie. So all you youngsters that are following SJ, you should go watch The Breakfast Club too.
And while they're at it, they could watch Fletch, Caddyshack, Vacation. I've got a whole list of movies from the 80s that are fantastic.
All the comedies from the 80s, yeah.
We don't even compare anymore with the movies. I'm seeing these John Hughes movies. A lot of those are really good, like 16 Candles, Weird Science. I could go on, but they're all really good movies. So anyone, if you want movie recommendations, I'll certainly send them over. So let's go back so we talked a little bit about some of the other people that you've interviewed. How did the interview with Paulogia go? Because I just spotted a Paulogia riff with William Lane Craig. So he made a video, and whenever he makes videos, I noticed that he has himself in this cartoon character with big muscles, and then he puts his opponents with big heads and like these little bodies. So he made a video with his views on something that William Lane Craig said, and William Lane Craig actually responded, and then Paulogia responded. Did he? I don't remember if you interviewed Paulogia before or after this whole William Lane Craig thing.
I think that was before, and yeah, like Craig tries to avoid all these little drama fights that kind of go on back and forth between the Christians and the atheists. So the Paulogia channel probably doesn't even have that much to do with like some of Paulogia's videos or criticisms of Christianity or anything like that. It was really kind of an interesting look at like how he grew up and like his desire to like write a comic book about dinosaurs and like how dinosaurs lived with humans. And then like in his study for like that comic book, he kind of had to kind of resolve the differences that he had between his faith and with what the science told. So, and with that, he kind of, and along with it, he liked the people that were, I guess, not part of his faith a little bit more than the people that he had to live with. So, yeah, that's the thing. I think for a lot of people's deconversion it's multi-factor, and you can't just assume it's one thing. It's usually multiple things that kind of stack up on top of each other. But yeah, his life story is really pretty interesting. So if anybody's interested in how Paulogia came to be Paulogia, then it's a good listen for that. Like
I will listen to that. I haven't listened to that whole thing.
Yeah, he even worked for Lucasfilm, like doing work on the prequel films. Yeah, is something I didn't even know about him at all. A lot of people have I don't know, unknown backstories about themselves, but it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and I interviewed him one time with Shannon Q on my channel. And so as if anyone doesn't know this, Paulogia and Shannon Q are dating, and they live on opposite ends of Canada. And she has a young child and he has 3 kids, and they go back and forth sometimes and meet up with each other, and they met on social media. I think that's what's fascinating about the whole thing. So I think she liked what he was saying on social media. Somehow they started dating. So I was, more power to them, Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's funny how that seems to be kind of the new system of human interaction now. Is like that's how like my sister, she actually married somebody from Germany because like they interacted online first, and then she ended up moving over there. And so now like my parents just like speak to her through Skype like pretty much every week. So yeah,
wow.
there's a lot of new changes to the way of human interaction with each other that we're not quite, I don't know, fully worked out yet and have a good understanding for how to deal with yet.
That's true. Now, just out of curiosity, because my brother also is in Germany. He lives in Berlin. Is she near that?
No, she's near Hamburg. She's kind of more off in the country, though.
Okay. Yeah, that's pretty neat. I like that. My brother, what happened to him was, he actually met a girl on the internet, and this is about 16 or 17 years ago. He met a girl on the internet, so he was really ahead of his time. And he dated her. She moved over to South Florida, and they lived together, and he dated her for 11 years. And then somehow they broke up, and he decided he was going to go to Germany and try it out. So he goes to Germany. And his very first day in Germany, he sees this restaurant in the morning with a bunch of people clashing like beer jugs, and he thinks, that's where I need to live. so he packed up his bags and he moved there. He sold everything he had. He sold his house, he sold his car, everything. And he moved to Germany, and he just stays in this little apartment. And he thought he was just going to have this life of a writer. And so he had a savings account, and he had to show the Germans a savings account to be able to stay there. And so he had a savings account, and he was writing his books and his poetry and stuff like that. And then somehow a girl got pregnant, and so he now is a dad, and he didn't really expect that. And so it's now he has a wonderful son. We just got to see him recently. He just came to South Florida with his son, and and my brother's very blessed now. So he's so happy that he has his son, and his son is a European Union citizen, and so now my brother gets to stay there, and so it's really neat. So
that's nice.
I met the mother of his son and a really nice woman, and so it's really nice. So
yeah, Yeah, that's one of the interesting things about the time we live in is how interconnected we are globally, and just being able to like I have this friend group on the Beverly channel, and like we're all very disconnected from each other globally. Like we've got a guy in Malaysia who was actually born in Australia, and then I have another Floridian that's I talk with, and then a guy in India as well. So and like it's certainly hard to get the timings just right to find the right time in our schedules to be able to talk, but it's so cool how yeah, just the expanse that we have now with our technology to be able to have these types of conversations taking place that would be unheard of in the past.
Oh yeah, it really, I remember years and years ago when I was in my 20s, I had a boyfriend who was a boat captain, and he would go travel, and he would go all around the world, and sometimes I would call him and we'd talk to each other internationally. The phone bill was outrageous. I won't even admit how much it cost. And these days you can talk to people all over the world for free. It's amazing. It's really amazing. And you probably know the time zones. That's another thing. You learn people's time zones. So I know if I'm talking to somebody in, England, they're probably 5 hours ahead. If I'm talking to Australia, they're maybe 13 or 15 hours behind. And so I think that's pretty neat. So, or I should say it's the opposite. 5 hours ahead. Yeah, 15 behind, but actually they're ahead of us. So yeah, that kind of stuff is pretty neat. So
it's very very cool to see. Yeah, how things are developing and like where they'll go from there, really.
Yeah, so that's a really neat thing. So do you have plans for any other teleplays after the Anti-Natalist gets out?
I don't know. I haven't really thought about it so much because like for me this has always felt more of like a personal pet project. And so I wanted to develop it just so that I would have some sort of justification for having spent a year working on this thing in my spare time, just so that I can like, look, I did that, and now I can work on something else. That way my whole year wasn't wasted in my spare time. And so I want to do more with this, just as I was mentioning earlier, try to get more clarity just from the script itself, and get like different perspectives from other people about these types of topics, because I honestly don't think they're talked about that much in the open public, anything like that at all. After this, I don't know. I'll probably have some other project that I'll pick up and then start working on that as well. And so we'll see.
I think you could do, since you've got this idea where you're taking different people's perspectives, and you've got this entertainment on Twitter that we watch all the time and these YouTube channels, I think you could probably take people with, okay, here's the atheist perspective or the anti-theist perspective. Here's the atheist perspective. Here's a person who's a Buddhist, like you mentioned, or a person who's a Hindu, and here's what their perspective is. And then here's a Christian who's a YEC, and here's a Christian who's an OEC, and so you can take all of these different perspectives, and it'd be interesting to throw them all in a room and make them duke it out.
Yeah, that's basically kind of like what the Anti-Natalist script is kind of about, is trying to like all these very divergent worldviews and throwing them all into a room to try to kind of argue with each other all about this specific topic, which I think is very interesting, because like while they might disagree on pretty much their entire like worldviews, there's at least one like shared enemy that they have in trying to combat the arguments put forward by the professor Anti-Natalist, that I think is interesting that they have that.
That's a great point, the shared enemy. And that's something that tends to bring people together in groups. So a lot of times who's a shared enemy in some of the anti-theist groups? Well, it's the religion. So it's the church. The church is the shared enemy. And then sometimes they'll identify people who are the shared enemy. I've been the shared enemy of some of them. So I got that distinction. But then I think that's a really interesting point. So you have this idea where you can all unify because, hey, wait, all this stuff you're saying we don't agree with, but all of us don't agree that we should just stop having kids, that the whole planet should just give up. And so Yeah, and
Yeah. That's the interesting. Well, you should take it as a compliment, then, Stephanie, that you're a binding force for a community to work around is their shared hatred of S.J. Thomason on Twitter.
yeah. Yeah. So
But
it seems like Bill Murray, if I got that going for me, which is nice.
yeah, and yeah, there is that like element of unification that can occur with a common enemy, but I think it is not as well founded as the common morality kind of identity politics. I think that's how Jonathan Haidt puts it in one of his books, that when you have a common enemy, as soon as that enemy is kind of conquered, then and like no longer relevant, then that group will necessarily dismiss or disperse because there's nothing unifying them anymore. Now you can kind of still have some sort of group-based unifying principle from common enemy identity politics, but the enemy has to be one that is long-standing. So he brings forward like some of the secular like alternatives to religion are, say, like woke politics or something like that, where the common enemy is racism, sexism, homophobia, things like that. And those are like viable centering principles for a lot of people because they have this shared politics that they want to achieve in the world, and so they can work towards that. But it's less so. I mean, sure, they can focus their attacks on specific individuals that are kind of like the front for these types of negative values like homophobia, sexism, things like that, and that can serve as the target for attack. But even after that target is taken care of, you still have this vague abstraction of sexism, racism, homophobia out there that is never going to kind of be conquered, really, because it's kind of an abstraction that can be overlaid onto anything, to the point that like you could look at a perfectly healthy interaction and then assume that there's some sort of racism or sexism occurring underneath the hood there, and then use that as your target to work against within your woke religion if you wanted to.
Yeah, I love that point. I love all those points, actually, because we are noticing a lot of that in politics. We're noticing a lot of accusations of racism and sexism and transphobism, and I could go on with all the isms, and we're noticing that. And I think, like you mentioned, the common enemy for a lot of people who are on the left, for example, is Trump. So they all decided that they don't like Trump. So, and Trump, I mean, I have to say, the fact he tweets out so much stuff, someone needs to screen his tweets. I mean, it's just crazy. But I think he's their common enemy. So when he gets out of office one day, it'll be interesting to see where people go, what the next candidate's going to look like. And so I think that might be something to follow. And I think you're right. That when the common enemy leaves or becomes irrelevant, then the group disperses unless they can find a new common enemy.
Right. Yeah.
So I noticed a lot of the anti-theists and atheists, one of the things that they found recently is they found this awful church called the NIFB that endorses, I think if I'm correct, they endorse things like stoning homosexuals and stuff like that. They say things like that in the service, I guess, which of course is a complete fringe, and we do not agree with that. We don't support that church, of course, but that was their common enemy. So they went down to one of their conferences, I guess, and Thomas Westbrook, Holy Kool-Aid, got up there and he was filming himself at the conference. And so that was pretty interesting. So
yeah, that was kind of the rise of the pumpkins on Twitter there. So I don't know if you follow SJ and some of the other people in there, you might see regularly these pumpkin emojis in people's Twitter bio, or not Twitter bios, but their Twitter names. And that was a point of unification for the anti-theist community to to hold some sort of group identity there against the NIFB church, because some comment made by the pastor there about Mr. Atheist and a pumpkin, something like that. So I don't know. You kind of see these like the emojis out there, and now there's kind of a backstory to some of that, even though I don't know the full thing exactly.
Yeah, and I did know it at one time. I can't remember because I did see that thing with the pumpkin. I just can't remember now because it was a little while ago that they did that. And so, but a lot of them still have the pumpkin. So the pumpkin is lingered. And so,
Yeah.
did you ever listen to? Have you ever read the book Under the Dome by Stephen King?
I haven't. No.
Okay, well, I'm just mentioning it because it also has a pumpkin. The whole idea in the whole book is it's building up to something big happening at Halloween. And so the whole time you're thinking pumpkins as you're reading the book. So I don't know if the atheists have read that book, but they might want to look at that because it's a pretty good book actually, but it's 2,000 pages, so it's kind of long. But
Yeah.
I think they made a series out of it on
Cool.
TV. So what else should we talk about before? I know we've talked about an hour, and I think that's probably about the amount of time that seems like a perfect time to draw to a close. But I wanted to see if there's anything else we can mention, or if people can find you. Are you going to set up your own YouTube channel, for example, or are you going to do anything else that you could get out there and get your name out? Because I think that your book should absolutely get out. And anyone, please, again, go to writer John Buck. Is that your name on Facebook too?
Yeah, but I don't really use Facebook.
Okay. Okay,
But
so
yeah,
just
I
so
think
Twitter's
that is-
really where people
Right.
can find you. So writer John Buck, and he will actually let you look at his teleplay, which is pretty great. And then you might want to listen to it when it's ready, when it comes out. So you said it's going to go live on September 1st too, right?
Right. And then, yeah, well, it depends on how well it works out. If it needs to, I'll create a cleaned up audio version of it that can also be put out there that people can just listen to by themselves. So
Great.
Yeah.
Great. So that's good. Let me ask you one last question. So what are your educational interests? Is your background philosophy, or because you're very deep in that anti-natalist, so it seems like you have a background in that.
Oh, well, I don't have any background in it other than like I'm interested in it. I was actually raised homeschooled, and so a lot of my education is just kind of attempt to be self-taught. And so like I like to read and like focus on these types of topics because I don't know, they seem interesting to me. But yeah, that's kind of my background, I guess, with that.
No, it's incredibly
I don't have
deep.
I don't
people
have
go
any,
to read your
professional.
When people go to read your book, they're going to be amazed because it's honestly incredibly deep. I couldn't stop reading it when I picked it up, and I was just gonna my idea was, oh, I'm just gonna take a quick look at it and I'll put it down. I'll read the whole thing tomorrow, and so I picked it up and I started looking at it. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is actually really interesting. What great concepts! Cool. And so I just couldn't put it down. So I read the whole thing, and now I'm going to read it again in a more deeper ways before to prepare for this reading.
Well, I actually have a update for it that'll just be mostly typos, but a couple like line changes here and there that I'll definitely send you soon, like before the end of the week for sure, just so that you guys have the updated version that you'll be using for the reading itself. So yeah,
and I like the ending, so I'm not going to do any spoilers. I'm not going to tell anybody what
Okay.
I liked. There was a little twist I think you kind of had at the ending a little bit with my character. So at least I saw she did something that I kind of liked. So I'm not going to mention what that is. So you guys will have to be surprised.
Okay. Yeah, for sure.
So that's good. Mm-hmm. So great. So anyway, John, I want to say thank you so much for coming on my channel. I'm going to, I think it's where I am right now. I'm on Eastern. It's 5:11 p.m. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop recording, and then I'm going to upload it to my YouTube channel. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to premiere it tonight at, say, maybe 7 o'clock. Does that sound like a good deal? So I'll set it up so that people can watch it and do a live stream next to it while they're watching it. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds good. Cool. Okay. And I'll try to be there in the chat too as well. So I know this will be kind of weird because like the people listening to it will be hearing me. I don't know if you would still be recording for that, but yeah. So I'll try to be there for the chat for that as well.
Oh, good. So then if they have questions, they can ask you right there if you're there. Okay,
yeah,
so
and I could probably send them a link to the.
Is that a good time, or should I do 6 o'clock? Is it better to do 7 o'clock?
Yeah, probably 7 would be better for me.
7. Okay, good. Yeah, because then I can go get dinner going for the kids and perfect. Awesome. Okay. So thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can find the stop button. I think it's right here. I'm correct. There we go.